Honorable Prime Minister, honorable ministers, heads of mission, ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad I didn't mess up the protocol part because I don't like it. And the reason I'm saying this is I was listening to Ivan when he said, it is a pleasure for me to be here today. And I thought that many times I've said the same thing without really meaning it. I say, it is a pleasure, but I'm simply happy or glad. But today is one of those occasions where it is a true pleasure to be with you. And I'm going to be sharing a few thoughts on poverty measurement in Rwanda and telling you also a bit about the work that we did with NISR in the revision of the methodology that produced the findings that you just saw. So I'm a poverty economist, so you will forgive me for doing a bit of preaching about the importance of poverty measurement. Why is it so important? Well, first because it reveals, Ivan just revealed, how many people are poor. That's an important figure. But I would say that even more important is to know who are the poor. Because by simply knowing a number, there's not much we can do in terms of policy design. We need to understand their deprivations, their needs, the context. And I believe that's the most important thing of the figures that were presented today. We know not only how many people in Rwanda are poor, but we will know, by looking more carefully at the data, who the poor people are. Now, I want to disagree with the MC when he said, I see direction, because I don't. What we see from this survey and every EACV is a snapshot. We have a very high quality snapshot of the situation of the population in Rwanda in terms of socioeconomic conditions, consumption, and so on. But a picture doesn't give us direction. The direction is what follows, and you will hear a few more thoughts I have on this. So, to us at the World Bank, what do we consider as good poverty measurement? We believe good poverty measurement should satisfy a few conditions. It should be based on a very solid conceptual framework. We are highly suspicious at the bank when countries start deviating from very solid conceptual frameworks and doing ad hoc adjustments. We're always highly suspicious. The second characteristic is it should be tailored to the national context. Poverty measurement shouldn't be something taken off the shelf because some other country uses it and simply apply it to Rwanda. It should also reflect, and you see that the word is in bold, current living conditions. It should be robust, and the best example I can come up with is, imagine a medicine that is highly effective, but it has the following property. If you give the right dose, it will cure the disease. But if you exceed the dose by 1%, it will kill the patient. You don't want a medicine like that. So you don't want a poverty measurement that if you change something slightly will give you a radically different result. Because then you will lose confidence in the measure. It should also ideally be stable over time so that we can compare. You probably saw in one of Ivan's slides that the methodology stayed the same throughout all the SCVs up to now. So that's great for comparability, right? And it should be thoroughly documented. That is important because that means there's transparency. If everything you do is properly documented, then that will lead to, yes, discussions, but mostly technical discussions, okay? Well, there's a problem with all these conditions, and that is that this tension, there's an inherent tension between these two. You tell me you want the measure to be current, but you're also telling me that you don't want to change it over time, right? So to allow for comparability. So that is the tension that statistics offices face when they measure poverty, is how often do we change the methodology to reflect current living conditions, knowing that any change will affect comparability. So Rwanda last updated its poverty line in 2013-14, and quite a lot has changed since then. Ivan presented a few figures. Here's a few others. And the reason why I use census data here and not EICV data, it's of course because when you make a decision on whether to adjust the methodology, you don't know EICV7 data. But using census data, you see that urbanization increased quite rapidly from 16 to 28%, and comparing the two last censuses. There's much higher access to electricity as the main source of lighting, from 18 to 61%. There's a substantial rise in cell phone usage, as Ivan indicated, and he also alluded to some of the changes in household consumption, right? People these days in Rwanda eat more outside their home. There's this program of school feeding. So NISR considered that these changes made it reasonable to adjust the poverty methodology. Now, why, as a World Bank, we suggest that if you're going to change one thing, change everything at once, okay? Our advice to governments is don't do a little improvement every time. And I'm going to give you an example of why that is a really bad idea. You see those shades of gray, and even if you disagree with me, let's think that any two adjacent colors are kind of similar. Okay? I mean, the white and the next gray, you can say, they're similar, it's fine. So again, take any two consecutive, and you might conclude that it's okay, they're very similar. But here's the issue. After you make a few changes and you compare your starting point and your end point, then that clearly is not similar at all, right? So this is what happens when governments tweak the methodology a little, just trying to improve every time. Over time, you really have something that is not comparable at all, right? So this is why we recommend to governments, if you're going to change one thing, change everything at once, and don't touch it for a long time. And that is the approach that NISR has followed. So it decided not only to update the line to reflect the current living conditions, but they said, let's use the best practices, current practices, let's do everything better, right? So it was a wholesale, in some sense, revision of the poverty methodology. Now, as a result of that revision, I can confidently say that the new methodology is based on a very solid conceptual framework, very widely used, very well understood. It is tailored to the national context. Ivan went too quickly. I know he didn't have time. I have seen very few countries in my work that decide to check every single number that it is used for the poverty calculation from scratch, right? So they started saying, we have been using 2,500 calories as a minimum calorie requirement. Why? Why? Let's use all the data we have and see if that's the best number for Rwanda, right? So from scratch, it is completely tailored to the national context. It, of course, reflects current living conditions, as Ivan explained, the most recent consumption patterns, and so on. It is robust. You can't imagine how many checks we did and say, okay, change this model a little bit, change that parameter a little bit, because again, we don't want a situation where if you increase the dose by 1%, you're gonna kill the patient. And the answer is all the changes we could come up with result in a very small change in the poverty rate. So the number you saw today is actually quite robust. It is not stable over time. You saw that there's a break in the series. It's not directly comparable. Please never, never, never compare the 27.4 with EICV2. You should not be doing that. Those numbers are not comparable. But sophisticated, state-of-the-art modeling techniques were used by NISR to produce that estimate of 39-something. I'm forgetting the exact number for EICV5. Those are the only two numbers that are comparable in terms of poverty rates. And this to me is a big plus of this edition of the EICV, and is how thoroughly the team has documented all the changes that were made. And in my mind, that will create a great platform to have technical discussions about the methodology. So the changes, as Ivan alluded to, both the line and the consumption aggregate were revised. This is a bit technical, and yeah, there will be time, as Ivan said, and other fora to have more technical discussions. But this revision used all the available evidence. It was purely evidence-based, and it follows international best practice. The latest recommendations, international recommendations to measure poverty, are used by NISR for this revision. Now, we worked as a World Bank team, and it is a team, I'm only the face, but there were many experts that contributed to this effort. For at least 12 months, I was checking emails, Ivan, last night when I was preparing the presentation. We started this engagement more than a year ago, providing advice on the international best practices, but we also conducted a very thorough review of the methodology. And that's why I can confidently say the things that I'm saying today. And not only that, we commend NISR for the transparency and rigor in this revision. We of course highly appreciate its trust, but I was telling the minister that Rwanda and NISR in particular should feel very proud about the work they have done on this. Now, is this mission accomplished? Because I heard people clapping. Of course, 27.4 is good news. But I would say not really. Not really. I believe, and Ivan consistently said that throughout his presentation, we need to do more work to really understand what was behind this important decline. He mentioned many other areas for further work. We also need to do more work to estimate how many people are vulnerable to falling into poverty. I was pleasantly surprised, Ivan, I was reading NST2 last night, not because I read NST2 every night, but just to prepare the presentation. And I saw that NST2 very explicitly states that vulnerability to falling into poverty should be a key priority for policy going forward. And I was not only glad to see it there, partly I was glad because this is a priority for you. You have expressed that very clearly. NISR wants to understand better what that means in Rwanda. Because first of all, this needs to be quantified. If we want to talk about vulnerability, we need to know how many people are vulnerable to fall into poverty. And as is the case in poverty, not only how many, but who. And what are their characteristics? So I'm happy to report that we already started work with NISR trying to quantify this issue of vulnerability to poverty. And again, most importantly, what I think the next step should be is we have now a trustworthy, high-resolution snapshot of the socioeconomic conditions of the population in Rwanda. The most important work now to be done is how can these gains be sustained and even deepened over time. Let me close with a few wishes. I did the same in NSDS for Ivan, and I like for some reason to close with wishes. The first one, I clarify, is not a wish, that's a fact. NISR has produced a new trustworthy snapshot, high-resolution snapshot on poverty in Rwanda. But this is what I wish for you. I wish that you can all have very robust technical discussions about the new poverty methodology. This is important. These changes need to be socialized, they need to be understood, and they need to be trusted. So I think a robust technical discussion is key for that to happen. And knowing, because now after more than a year of working very closely with them, I know that the NISR team is very well equipped to lead that technical discussion. My second wish for you is that after that robust technical discussion, there is a swift shift to a national dialogue about, again, the way forward, right? We need to understand how is it that we came to the point where we are today, but most importantly, going forward, how can those gains be sustained and deepened? To me, that's the most important outcome of this exercise. And finally, it's a personal wish. I enjoyed so much working with the NISR team because we had a very frank, productive, a relationship of mutual trust that I wish for myself that we can continue collaborating with the government of Rwanda on poverty issues. Thank you for your attention.